Mark, you've been heavily involved across the globe in many organisations focused on digital learning, student success, and more recently, micro-credentials. So I'm hoping that you will summarise for us today the European approach to micro-credentials and really share some of the amazing projects that are being undertaken across Europe, and particularly the ETRU group of innovative universities, who I know have a very bold vision for the future.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And it's nice to be introduced as a New Zealander, but someone from down under. And it's, in many respects, a privilege here living in Europe, but I still bring that down under perspective to life. And I think that's one of the enriching aspects of being in this part of the world. But to answer your question, there is a lot happening in Europe right now. I'm going to use the metaphor of a roadmap because all roads at the moment appear to be leading towards micro-credentials. Rightly or wrongly, actually, and we may get into this as, how come, but the European Commission has really been leading the charge with trying to provide a policy framework for all member countries. So something is done in a more coordinated way. And I'm sure many people will be aware that different countries around the world have been doing things with micro-credentials, but there's a lack of common understanding, lack of shared definitions even. So the significance of what's going on in Europe, I don't think can be underestimated when you have a block of countries trying to adopt what's called a European approach. That said, and I'll stop on this note for now, it's incredibly complex of what's happening. So I can explain some of the threats and why it is so complex, but it's certainly significant.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that, because when I've been investigating and researching it and reading everything that comes up around the European approach, there are just so many things going on that I really do get a little lost in which thread to go down. Where would you start?
Well, I think I'll start with the European Commission, because the Commission has an interesting role in education. Each member state sets its own policy agenda, its own frameworks for education. It's responsible, each country is responsible for education. So the Commission can only nudge and set policy architecture, encourage, support with funding, and the funding's not insignificant, I should emphasize. But the Commission last year, actually really before COVID, decided that it wanted to help to produce something that would support a more European-wide approach, because observers were seeing what was happening. New Zealand was well known for having started with something that was linked into the qualification framework. It often gets acknowledged for that. But the United States, similarly, more at a state level, which it's kind of a little bit like cowgirl or cowboy land, with all different manner of things happening with badges and the like. So the last thing in Europe, and it's kind of around European values, that a whole of European approach. So the Commission formed a large consultation group, not huge, but certainly a wide number of stakeholders. For whatever reason, I had the privilege to be able to serve in that group. I sort of say for whatever reason, slightly tongue-in-cheek, because my own background is around providing access to education. I actually don't like to necessarily be thought of just, interested in new technology in teaching and learning. And so when I was at Massey University, New Zealand's large distance and online provider, I had responsibility for that portfolio. So I come with a long track record in trying to promote access to education and support lifelong learning. And so there isn't an accident that I'm around the table in a number of places. What happened, of course, is COVID came along. So instead of having interesting and long meetings in Brussels, where we tend to go, the base of the European Commission, we met virtually. And that was in itself quite a challenge for quite a sizable group. But we had a series of meetings to try to produce something as a European-wide approach. Of course, the very first thing we needed to do, and many people listening to this might be wondering, what the heck is a micro-credential? And that took us a number of months, in fact, almost a whole year, and I'm not sure we've fully resolved that. We have produced a draft sort of European definition of what a micro-credential is, some cornerstone principles underpinning that definition about proof of learning, the need for assessment, transparency, beyond, shall we say, warm body badges that are sometimes referred. So needing to have, we often talk about 3 C's, the currency of a micro-credential. I'll refer to a macro-credential to start with for people who are not as familiar with this area. We all understand what a degree is, a macro-credential, if you like. So we're talking about the micro version of that. It just so happens, actually, the degree, the macro-credential is not quite as consistent as we might think it is globally. In some countries, degrees are 4 years, some they're 3, variations across disciplines. So we don't actually begin with quite the same solid foundation as we might like to think we do with macro-credentials. But nonetheless, the Commission's work to produce, in the end, published in December, quite a substantial report defining what a micro-credential is in the European context, and then producing a roadmap for how we might go forward in a common and shared way.